She took her blood pressure every morning for 10 days straight. And the numbers were not good. The top number was not good. It was 168, 172, one time like 179, over 92, so high lower number as well. And the poor thing, like, she told me she'd stopped even wanting to look because every time she did that, it just made her more stressed. It made the pressure go even higher, right? As it would for most people. I believe she went through, 3 other doctors over maybe 4 or 5 years. Same answer every time, some version of we'll manage it. Then what she shared with me was that one Tuesday evening while she's cooking dinner, she had 1 or 2 glasses of wine, then took it on a whim, took her blood pressure again. And she kind of told me this with a slightly embarrassed smile. And yet she grabbed both of her blood pressure machines, and it was basically 120 over 80. She thought that first reading was kind of a fluke, so she actually checked her blood pressure with her other machine, and same type of numbers, like within 1 or 2 points. Basically, 60-point drop and perfect blood pressure numbers. Not from medication, not from a breathing exercise, from wine. And that's when I knew that this was never a blood pressure problem. This was a nervous system problem. And those are 2 very different conversations. So I'm going to walk you through Beth's full case in this video. And I'm going to show you what I found when I looked upstream. I'm going to share with you what her standard labs looked like. And frankly, they looked almost completely normal, which was not really surprising to me for someone like her. And I'm going to show you the connection that most physicians, frankly, fail to even look for or realize. And that is between the nervous system, her blood pressure, and something quietly happening in her brain. Because the body is telling a story, and most medicine, even functional medicine practitioners, only read the last line. And I'm not going to give you what supplement to take or what medication to take or what protocol to follow, but I am going to give you a different way for you to read your body and learn what it's saying. And if your blood pressure is elevated, but everything else is normal, but you still don't feel right or feel right about the number, I think you'll find something useful. As always, this video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice or create a doctor-patient relationship. Now, Beth is very high functioning, I would say, early 60s, late 50s, sharp, articulate. She does her homework. She reads extensively about health. She does the dietary stuff for the most part. Frankly, she really does a good job. She's tried lowering her sodium, exercising consistently, and I would say by most measures, she's doing things very well. And yet her household was stressful. She certainly ran it to a large extent, but that chronic tension was there. And as I mentioned, she's seen a number of physicians over a number of years. Each one of them looked at it and said, we'll manage it, whether that was with medications or supplements. But as I also mentioned, every time it was high, it just stressed the heck out of her. And she'd really become afraid of her own data. And she was embarrassed that it took wine to kind of treat her high blood pressure. Wine worked. It helped dramatically. And frankly, through her own experimentation, she discovered that those numbers were dramatically high in the morning and scared her. She could bring them down with 1 or 2 glasses of wine in the night, in the evening or late afternoon. And that was the most reliable thing she'd found in the past 5 years. And she knew she did not want to take blood pressure medications which I'm all for in her case. There are times when it's necessary in an emergency situation. However, your body does not have a deficiency of any blood pressure medication. And she tried a number of herbal or natural supplements. Some of them helped, but we're talking 5 or 10 points, not the 60 points that wine brought it down. Wine worked better than all of those natural supplements. And so she may have been looking for permission to drink more wine from me when she first came to me. I didn't ask her that specific question, but I do know that she came more with the intention of asking, what does this mean? So through the conventional medicine lens, they're looking at high blood pressure as a cardiovascular problem. Too much pressure in the blood vessels, too much stress on the heart. And the answer is reduce the numbers with medication, dietary adjustments, which usually just means decrease your sodium intake, and lifestyle changes are usually recommended. But it focuses very much on how do we get the number down, not why is the number up in the first place. And functional medicine, typically they'll look at the kidneys a little bit more, the adrenal glands, maybe the thyroid. And all of these have, their hands in the pot. They all contribute a little bit. So they might look at those labs, which standard conventional labs don't even look at. I will generally go a step further or two further and look at and ask the question, what's happening on the inside of the lining of the blood vessels? What type of water are you drinking? Are you getting enough body electrical charge? And the most important thing I look at with blood pressure isn't the blood vessel itself. I would say it's the nervous system, because your blood vessels are innervated. They're wrapped in nerve fibers from your autonomic nervous system. And when your nervous system shifts into sympathetic mode, the fight or flight, those vessels constrict. The pressure goes up. The blood pressure goes up. That's not pathology necessarily. That's more physiology. That's what's happening. It's not really the why. Your body and frankly in that situation, your body is doing exactly what it was meant to do. It's doing exactly as it evolved to do. And the problem is when that sympathetic system, nervous system, that fight or flight doesn't shut off. And that's when a different question should be asked. And so that question, when applied to Beth of why wine worked, that was really important because that's a clue. That was not an accident. Now, balancing out the sympathetic nervous system, the gas pedal, the fight or flight, the stress, the urgency, is the parasympathetic, the brake. It's the rest, the digest, the repair, the regulate. And in a healthy person, a healthy nervous system, there's this fluid, healthy balance between the two. It's fine to get the nervous system revved up as long as we can bring it back down. You want to step on the gas when you need it, and you want to step on the brake when you need it. And Beth's gas, frankly, had been maybe floored, maybe it shouldn't be quite so dramatic, but it had been on for way, way too long without a brake. And wine for her was that break. It didn't last forever. It didn't last for more than a few hours. It didn't last consistently, but it did do it effectively. That's why her blood pressure dropped 60 points regularly, like consistently when she drank a glass or two of wine. Her blood vessels were not defective. They were simply working how they were supposed to work. And the wine was not the medicine, but it did provide the map to discover the real issue causing the elevated blood pressure in the first place. An interesting caveat to Beth's case was that all of her conventional labs were literally perfect. Cholesterol is perfect, blood sugar is perfect, kidneys are perfect, thyroid numbers were perfect. Literally nothing to flag. But picture an electrician comes to your house and checks the outlets and turns on the light switches, all those check out. And they give you, they give your electrical system of your house a clean bill of health. But they never looked in the wall at the wiring. But if it was the wiring, if that was the upstream thing occurring, they never looked at that. They never gave it to you. The standard blood work is like checking the outlets and flipping the light switches and saying everything's okay, even though it's not. And in Beth's case, the wiring in the wall was her nervous system. And so I would say normal labs don't mean a normal story. They mean the story has not been read yet. Now, there was one more functional medicine type of lab that functional medicine providers will check that was not normal, and that was 𝙘𝙤𝙬𝙬. It was on the low normal side. I would say on the low side if you're looking at really optimal levels. And that wasn't a measurement of acute stress, but it is a measure of chronic stress, typically. And so I would say it's like more of a measure of how many miles have been put on the car. So in context with Beth's situation, it was kind of like a fingerprint that showed that her body had been running in a stressful pattern too much, too often, for too long. She wasn't conscious of the stress because it had become her baseline. It had become her new normal. And oftentimes that's kind of how chronic stress, I would say chronic stress doesn't feel like stress after a while. It just feels like a regular Tuesday. And here's an interesting little twist that most doctors won't go down the path. Because when your nervous system and your immune system communicate, and it's like they're not separate departments. And when the sympathetic nervous system runs too hot, too stressed out for too long, it sends a signal to the immune system that there's a threat. And the immune system responds by ramping up. It becomes hypervigilant. And sometimes that hypervigilance can actually begin to target the body's own tissues. And in Beth's case, she actually had antibodies to some of her own brain tissue, different types of antibodies. And not dramatically elevated, but significant enough to be a concern or something to watch and monitor and hopefully improve. And so it shows how her blood pressure issue wasn't like cardiovascular risk. It was a signal of a larger pattern that the nervous system was under too much stress, and that was causing the immune system to follow the nervous system into overdrive, and that her brain tissue was actually on the receiving end of that conversation. So I want to kind of repeat that because it's super important. Fight or flight doesn't just stress the heart. If sustained over the years, it starts a conversation with the immune system, and that conversation is a tense, passive-aggressive conversation and can reach the brain and affect the brain negatively. So what was the root of all this? Because it wasn't a broken heart. It was not bad genes. It was not too much salt. It was a nervous system that had been on chronic overdrive for too long. And she had become used to it. Her mind had become used to it, but her body had not. The blood pressure was the body keeping the score. The adrenal markers were a measurement of the stressful miles being put on, and the brain antibodies were the downstream conversation that nobody thought to look for. And I would say that the body keeps the score even when we've gotten very good at pretending it doesn't. So what did we do for her? Because it wasn't a pill, it wasn't a medication pill, and it wasn't a supplement pill, at least not as the main therapies or the main therapeutic modalities. In her situation, and this is where I ask, I ask for feedback. Hey, how do you feel about this option? How do you feel about this option? How do you feel about this option? Right? Vagus nerve stimulation, a device that you can use for 5, 10, 15 minutes, once a day, twice a day. Maybe when she normally wanted to reach for a glass of wine, could use that beforehand and just monitor, see what it does. Box breathing, but not in the way that most people suggest it. A lot of people will have a breathing practice and they'll sit down for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes once a day. And that's great. Most people can't keep that up ongoing. And for me, it's not so much about the quantity of time each day. It's more about the consistency. And so I would way rather have someone do 1 or 2 or 3, whatever they can do. But even if it's just one really nice, slow box breathing breath, once an hour, we're talking 12 to 16 breaths a day. I mean, this is not very much. But doing that once an hour And don't get me wrong, doing more than 1 would be better. 5 would be great. But doing that once, like taking 1 minute, 15 seconds, 1 minute, once an hour throughout the day is going to be so much more effective than sitting there for 30 minutes once a day, because we're going to be able to train our body very regularly to get out of the overdrive. And for her and most people in this situation, always morning sunlight, grounding daily, gradual reduction, in her case, of the coffee wine cycle. So kind of interesting. That's not always the case with, I would say, most people. Most people drink a cup of coffee and 30 minutes, an hour later, their blood pressure is going to be noticeably higher. And here's a nugget: fascia work. Moving the body in a way that brings vibrancy to the fascia. The fascia is a spider web of tissue that surrounds most of our muscles, tendons, organs. It's very underappreciated. It has been very underappreciated. In medical school, in my anatomy class, we literally just discarded it like it was an annoying cobweb, when in fact it's this beautiful, rich organ in our body that transmits electricity and holds structured water and electrical charge. There's many nerve fibers in the fascia tissue as well, so very regulating to the nervous system. It's a huge one. And I did recommend potassium supplements in her case, omegas, because those were really low, so just from an anti-inflammatory immune system perspective, and some mitochondrial support. But those are not the main, those are like layered on after everything else. The emphasis was put on everything else before any of those supplements. And after just a few weeks, especially a couple months, blood pressure readings way down, maybe not perfect, but like 40 points down. Now, what would be the ultimate upstream work would be to address what was actually causing the stress in the first place. And in this person's situation, I think the way they were raised, so much goes back to early childhood. I don't want to call it trauma because I think that term is overused. I think it's just for some people there can be trauma, flat out trauma. For other people, it's just childhood life. It can be stressful. Not every household is perfect. Most households are not. Most parents are not perfect. And they cause these little micro traumas that form how we react to the world. And then many people, there's obviously much more recent stuff, marital relationship issues. And yet, despite not even doing that in this case, we were able to bring it down by 60, 70%, which is very significant. And all without having to go on a medication or taking Hawthorne or too many other natural blood pressure lowering medications. And I think this is key. Like, this was so empowering because she said something like, I finally understand what my body has been trying to tell me. And that's gold right there. That's empowerment. And then what I've already said, but I want to call out, is that for most people, or often, chronic stress doesn't necessarily always feel like stress. It just feels like your life. And so also, the most important question is not what's wrong. It's what's upstream of what's wrong. That's what I encourage you to figure out. Hopefully you've learned a little bit of context of how to think through a situation like that, because that is where most healing truly begins. So if you saw yourself in any part of this, of Beth's story, maybe it was blood pressure, maybe it was some other medical condition or symptom, but if you've been told your numbers are good, or your numbers can be managed, but something doesn't seem right, that's data. Use it. But your body is telling a story. You just haven't found the right guide or doctor, but really guide or teacher to help you read it yet. And take care of your nervous system. It's the one running the show.